What's going on, guys? Just got home from work, got changed. We're taking the kids to the park, which should be pretty fun. Let me show you what I'm wearing, since most of the time I'm in suits and I don't do casual stuff very often. So, hoodie is Franken Oak, this awesome field jacket, Beckett and Robb. Also the hat, Beckett and Robb, but it's just a sample. It's not something that we may even make for sale, but it's not right now. Jeans are Mott & Bow, and shoes are Allen Edmonds. Now, some guys would say that these shoes are a little bit too dressed up for the rest of the outfit. Yeah, they're chukkas, but the shape and the last is a little bit more, I don't know, sleek and refined, but I think they work. They didn't last very long, which is understandable. It's 1st of November and it's cold out here today. So I wanted to follow up on the last video about pattern disruption. So if you haven't watched that yet, go watch that and then come back. Because obviously I've been thinking about this more as I've been experiencing it more because I don't have the beard. And there are a couple things that I've thought about and I'm kind of starting to flesh out and I want to share with you guys. The first one is that the shorter the timeline in which you're disrupting the pattern, the less drastic it has to be in order to have the same kind of effect. Now, if you think about my beard, for example, that's the only thing about me that has changed. I didn't dye my hair. I'm not wearing completely different clothes. I'm not speaking differently. I haven't left my wife. Like, none of these things have happened. The only difference is that I don't have hair on my face anymore. In the long run, it's really a minor thing, but because it happened so quickly, it was a huge pattern disrupt, and it changes the way that people perceive me, and to some extent it even changes the way that I perceive myself, and we'll talk more about that further on in the video. Whereas if you go over a longer time period, then it needs to be a bigger change. So for example, let's say that you're trying to put on some weight, you're trying to build some muscle. If you build 5 pounds of muscle over a 1-year period, not that big of a deal, whereas if you put on 45 pounds of muscle over a 1-year period, that's going to be a hugely noticeable difference, and that's going to be a crazy pattern disrupt for most people. And so the longer the time period over which it goes, then the bigger it has to be. So I would say use that to whatever extent you want to, as far as if you're going to have pattern disruption, be a tool in your arsenal. Now, the other thing that came up with all of this is how much appearance and that pattern that you either establish or choose to kind of disregard really affects your identity. I've noticed that even just within myself, because so on the last video, one of my Odysseus Undertaking members left a comment about how my presence isn't as dominant as it was, or as, you know, it could have been, just because I've gotten rid of the beard. And visually, with that change happening, that changes a lot of your perceptions of me. But what's crazy is it also can change your perception of yourself. When I catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I'm not used to what I see, and I feel differently. And to some extent, it's not like I necessarily act differently or that I have changed my goals or changed my other systems in my life, but my own perception of myself is a little bit different, and to some extent it's a little bit less confident, just because the way that I look when I see myself now is entirely new, and I look like a stranger even to myself. It can have this kind of subconscious effect of, wait a minute, who is that guy? That's not me. Who is that guy? At the same time, I forget that I don't have a beard. And so when I see people this week who this is the first time they've seen me and I see their reactions, it kind of takes me half a second to catch up and go, oh yeah, I shaved. They haven't seen me like that before. That's why they're treating me differently, or that's why their eyes are so big, or their jaws drop, or whatever their reaction may be. And so it really can kind of affect your identity, both within who you see yourself to be and how other people perceive you. And I would say anybody who would try to argue differently, who would say that appearance doesn't affect identity, even self-perception of identity, all you have to do is make a drastic change today. Go and put on some clothes that are completely different than anything you've ever worn. Go and get a completely different haircut, or if you've got a beard, shave one. Do something that's drastic, make a big pattern disrupt, and then spend 2 or 3 days interacting with the people with whom you normally interact, and tell me that they're not treating you differently, and that as a result of that and the way that you now see yourself when you see yourself in the mirror, or when you see the way that you respond to other people, that you don't feel a little bit differently about yourself too. Now, it's not a moral or an immoral thing, it's just a reality. And I think a lot of times, especially we as men, feel like appearance is surface, and who I am on the core should be completely unrelated to that. And that's not entirely true. I mean, we've tried to establish that for a long time on this channel, that the surface reflects what's down at the core. And I think a lot of times we've seen it that way, where what's down here impacts what's up here. And I think that that is a very good thing. But a lot of times what we haven't talked about, and what I'm just really starting to realize now, is a lot of times what goes on up here can affect who you are in here. And I mean, there have been studies that have been conducted on stuff like that. You know, you feel more like a doctor if you're wearing a white lab coat, and you feel more like an authority figure if you're wearing a police uniform or a military uniform. And so the way that you dress can impact your own self-perception of your identity, and it certainly impacts the way that other people perceive you and what your identity is. In fact, I had a friend who came over last night. He was telling me a story about a coworker of his who had really kind of long hair, a wispy, really full beard that would have taken a lot of time to be able to commit to it. Kind of looked like somebody out of, I don't know, like the Lumineers or Mumford & Sons, kind of a folksy guy, and even based on a little bit on the way that he dressed. And so he was telling my friend Brandon that he's into motorcycles. And so Brandon's working on a bike and wanted him to show him what he's working on. And so he takes him outside and shows him this, like, I don't know, it's like an R1 or an R6, which is, it's a crotch rocket. It's totally in conflict with what the perceived identity, because as I was telling you that story, you probably were thinking the same thing that I was when I heard that story. This guy's going to be riding some sort of a bobber, maybe a cafe racer or a chopper, but something that fits within that identity of the kind of folksy, bearded hipster dudes. But instead, he's riding a crotch rocket. He's got the full gear, the bright lime green jackets. I mean, he's totally decked out. And then a couple weeks later, he ends up showing up to work with his haircut in a much kind of more aggressive and trendy way, where it's, you know, the super high fade. I think he even had like a part shaved in, and his beard's completely gone. And what's funny is Brandon tells me this, and this is independent of him knowing that I'm, you know, thinking about this stuff right now, but he says all of a sudden, just with these changes, he looks more consistent with all the other things I know about him, with the music he listens to, with the kind of motorcycle he rides, with the streetwear that he's into. All of a sudden, just by that grooming change, his identity is more consistent with what it should have been, or at least what he projected it, than what his hair and his beard told the rest of the world he was. So, I don't know. It's really interesting stuff. And again, I'm just kind of thinking this through and figuring this out as I go, so I'm not going to say anything definitively, because I would love to hear what you guys have to say. If you've experienced this kind of stuff, and if you recognize it either in yourself when you've gone through some sort of pattern disruption, or you've seen other people who go through it, I really think that there's something here, especially between the relationship between surface and depth and how those two interact with each other. It's not just a one-way street. But like I said, I would love to hear what you guys think. Leave me a comment below. As always, leave me a thumbs up. Again, those always help the channel grow. I appreciate it. Have a great day, guys. I'll see you on the next one.